We have the gambling policy passed in 2022, which, among other things, seeks to balance between the need for a friendly investment climate, but also to establish a very robust regulatory regime for this particular sector by transforming gambling into a social force for social development. And one of the key planks of that policy is how to raise additional revenues both for national government and the county government. So this particular bill is very timely, and the policy, of 2023 this bill gives life to that particular policy. Mr. Speaker, gambling, like tobacco, alcohol, prostitution, drugs, junk food, and all other demerit goods, tend to present challenges to many governments. Their consumption is generally considered socially unacceptable or undesirable, but at the same time it is almost impossible to stamp them out completely because of their perceived negative effects to the consumers. Consequently, a balance has to be established as to how to limit their overconsumption or cases of addiction, damage to health, and the various dysfunctional social lives they cause, plus also a lot of external costs to third parties. But they also provide a very rich avenue for new emerging and very transnational crimes like tax evasion, money laundering, and financing of terrorism. In Kenya today, Mr. Speaker, the gross revenue for gambling is in excess of $250 million. And this sector is growing year on at 27 to 30%. You can imagine how much money is circulating in it. This particular bill seeks to establish the Gambling Authority of Kenya, the Gambling Appeals Tribunal, and a gambling tax, which, as you have heard, the majority leader would like to propose a higher regime. From our analysis, gambling tax in the region ranges from 15 to 25%, so we'll debate that at the right time. But also, it seeks to generate revenue for what we call good causes. This is culture, sports, arts, recreation, heritage, protection of vulnerable groups such as PWDs, aged, orphans, protection, rehabilitation of problem gamblers, environment, climate change, relief, innovation, education, entrepreneurship, libraries, and supporting emergencies. But we also looked at the policy and incorporated certain safety measures that would help create sanity in this sector. For example, we are proposing restriction on gambling advertisement, both to the news companies, but also to the gambling companies, and also the times and the regime of how gambling advertisement should be handled so as to protect children and other vulnerable groups. We are also in the bill proposing regulation of online gambling. This is where people gamble on the internet or through use of remote communication. And this is very addictive, but also presents transnational issues on jurisdiction as also, opportunities for money laundering and financing of terrorism. And then we have proposed in the bill very strict deposit limits so that people gamble in small amounts to avoid impulsive gambling. And we have also proposed restriction on use of what are called prediction apps. In fact, we had a small group of very good Kenyans called Gambling Association Society of Kenya, led by a gentleman called Nelson Bwire and his friend, I think, Kipto, who educated us a lot about these prediction apps where they give people a false sense of comfort and you continue gambling very heavily. But I think there are also issues of public awareness, and we have also introduced surety schemes equivalent to what obtains in banking industry, depositors protection, so that those who come to establish gambling businesses here provide security in case they run away, so that those who have won prizes don't lose out. And there are also new provisions that are novel on savings. So if your people are gambling, there'll be an amount of money that will be deducted to be saved for their own personal use at a later date. And my Honorable Chair, I would like to note that there's a lot of work that we still need to do in this particular sector. We have very many challenges when it comes to the gambling sector. Amongst them is the fact that, as I've said, issues of tax evasion, money laundering, and financing of terrorism. But there's also the issue, the requirement that if you want to license somebody, you have to vet, do security checks, and undertake heavy due diligence on their backgrounds. And we have had lapses in enforcement mechanisms so as to curb illegal gambling and ensure effectiveness of self-exclusion measures. This is where a person acknowledges he's an addict, or close members of his family will record that he's an addict to gambling, and then we put him on a program to be excluded from going into casinos and other places. And we also require strong enforcement to do public awareness campaigns, promote responsible gambling behaviors, and protection of the young, vulnerable, and other members of society. Consequently, we are appealing to the Ministry of Interior as the ministry that will be responsible for this particular act to take these measures very seriously so as to protect the public. There's still a bit of work that we need to do, which we were not able to achieve, and hopefully the government side will see it fit to find ways of working on these new areas. One is prohibition of credit facilities for gamblers. There are people who go to Fuliza, borrow money, and quickly M-Pesa it to a gambling pay bill. We think there's scope for regulation here so that those dealing with online lending can be restrained from allowing transfers of money from their facilities to well-known gambling pay bills. We also want to impose restrictions on other activities, but also call upon competition for licenses. In other jurisdictions, you don't just walk in, apply, and pay 1 million shillings. Licenses for gambling are actually advertised, and people compete so that the government can raise additional revenue. I think there'll be need to create some further work on that, so that licenses are competed for, gambling licenses, just like we did for Safaricom, Airtel, and the rest. And also the prediction apps, gambling prediction apps, I think we need to do some work, additional work, and restrict them. But most importantly, we need to anchor the Sports, Arts, and Social Development Fund, where much of this gambling levy will be going into, in an act of parliament. Presently, I think it is established by a regulation, and that is not very solid enough. I think the governmental side should bring a bill to help us deal with those issues. With those remarks, Honorable Speaker, I support.
Thank you. The Honorable Donya Doris.